Cá. Cái cá đấy là do mình nấu tối nó chưa bóng. Bây giờ là 8:37, em sẽ đọc đến 10 giờ, 1 tiếng rưỡi. Em sẽ xem là how many page I can read in 90 minutes. It is about 60 to 90 page. Thế là đau mắt quá, chưa bé thôi.
Thế là em không có đồ vật sao?
Không. Ok. Sao nó mở định dạng PDF mà? I want to read the book, fucking.
Thế nhỉ?
À thôi không nói bậy, em không nói bậy nữa. Mình không biết nó bị làm sao rồi. À đây. Ok. Chưa đọc được cái chữ nào mà đã thấy hoa hết cả mắt rồi. Ok, hôm nay em đọc đến trang 105. Trong vòng 90 phút em sẽ đọc được 60 trang, nghĩa là em sẽ đọc được đến trang 165. Ha ha ha. 165 là nó sẽ đến hết part 2, The Agricultural Revolution. Cuộc cách mạng công nghiệp. Nông nghiệp. Cambridge Dictionary. Yeah. Ok. Còn mình đọc đến đây rồi này. Bắt đầu. In the years following 9500 BC, the descendants of the Natufians continued to gather and process cereals, but they also began to cultivate them in more and more elaborate ways. When gathering white grains, they took care to lay aside part of the harvest to sow the fields next season. They discovered that they could achieve much better results by sowing the grains deep in the ground rather than haphazardly. Haphazardly, it means a way that does not have an obvious order or plan. Có nghĩa là lộn xộn, một cách ngẫu nhiên. Ngẫu nhiên thì sao không bảo là randomly đi lại, còn haphazardly
có tính học thuật không?
The new plan was introduced haphazardly. Kế hoạch mới được đưa ra một cách ngẫu nhiên. Những nơi trú ẩn nằm rải rác, sao nào? Nó kiểu rải rác nhưng một cách ngẫu nhiên. Haphazardly. Shelters are scattered haphazardly about the desert. Có vẻ em xem Peaky Blinders nhiều quá nên em cũng bắt chước giọng action Anh rồi. Hồi trước em nói anh Mỹ nghe phèn ẻ. Ok. Haphazardly sẽ thêm nó vào đây. oh, 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 oh. In a way, that does not have an obvious order or plan. Randomly, có thể hiểu đơn giản là như vậy. Scattering them on the surface, so they began to hoe and plow. Đấy là các từ mới mà mình không thể hiểu được. The garden tool with a long handle and a short blade used to remove weed and break up the surface of the ground. Ok, nó là cái cuốc cho một cuốc. Cái cuốc, nhưng mà nó lại là cái loại cuốc mà nó để xới cỏ thôi. And plow máy cày. Trời ơi, đúng là cách mạng nông nghiệp, toàn cày với cả cuốc. Vâng. Gradually, they also started to weed the fields, so guard them against parasites and to water and fertilize them. As more effort were directed towards cereals cultivation, there was less time to gather and hunt wild species. The foragers became farmers. No single step separated the woman gathering wild wheat from the woman farming domesticated wheat. So it's hard to say exactly when the decisive transition to agriculture took place, but 800-500 BC, the Middle East was peppered with permanent villages such as Jericho, whose inhabitants spent most of their time cultivating a few domesticated species. Các loài đã được thuần hóa, canh tác cái gì đấy là peppered. Không có tiếng Việt sao? Hạt tiêu. Ok. Nhưng mà còn peppered là cái gì nhỉ? Bị hạt tiêu à? Peppered with, rắc với pepper thì là hạt tiêu, còn peppered thì là rắc rối. Trời ơi, hàng xóm nó lại hát rồi. Rắc. Vâng. Such as Jericho bla bla. Không cần nào nó chạy. Nó hát thì em sẽ nói to hơn nó nữa. Xem ai sợ ai.
Bằng nó được không?
Chắc là cũng được. Để tí em mở live show ca nhạc cho đến lúc 10 giờ. With the move to permanent villages and the increase of food supply, the population began to grow. Giving up the nomadic lifestyle enabled women to have a child every year. Babies were weaned at an early age. They could be fed on porridge and gruel. The extra hands were sorely needed in the fields, but the extra mouth quickly wiped out the food surplus. So even more field had to be planted as people began living in disease-ridden settlements, as children fed more on cereals and less on mother's milk, and as each child competed for his or her porridge with more and more siblings, try more really short. In most agricultural societies, at least one out of every 3 children died before reaching 20. Oh my god. Yet the increase in births still outplays the increase in death. Humans kept having larger numbers of children. Sao cái này nó nhỏ thế nhỉ? Làm sao để cho nó to ra bây giờ? Okay, nice. Rồi xong mình ngồi nhìn cái màn hình. Tiếp tục. With them, the wheat bargain became more and more burdensome. Children died in droves, and adults ate bread by the sweat of their brows. The average person in Regico of 8,500 BC lived a harder life than the average person in Regico. Jericho live a harder life than the average person in Jericho of 9,500 BC or 12,000 BC. But nobody realized what was happening. Every generation continued to live like the previous generation, making only small improvements here and there in the way things were done. Paradoxically, a series of improvements, each of which was meant to make life easier, added up to a millstone around the necks of the farmers. Why did people make such a fateful miscalculation? For the same reason that people throughout history have miscalculated. People were unable to fathom the full consequences of their decisions. Whenever they decided to do a bit of extra work, say to hold the fields instead of scattering seeds on the surface, people thought, yes, we will have to work harder, but the harvest will be so bountiful. We won't have to worry anymore about lean years. Our children will never go to sleep hungry. It made sense. If you work harder, you would have a better life. That was the plan. The first part of the plan went smoothly. People indeed worked harder, but people did not foresee that the number of children would increase, meaning that the extra wheat would have to be shared between more children. Neither did the early farmers understand that feeding children with more porridge and less breast milk would weaken the immune system, and that permanent settlements would be hotbeds for infectious disease. They did not foresee that by increasing their dependence on a single source of food, they were actually exposing themselves even more to the depredation of drought. Nor did the farmer foresee that in good years their burgeoning granaries would tempt thieves and enemies, compelling them to start building walls and doing God duty. When why didn't humans abandon farming when the plan backfired? Partly because it took generations for the small changes to accumulate and transform society, and by then nobody remembered that they had ever lived differently. And partly because population growth burned humanity's boat. If the if the adoption of ploughing 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 no, I need to translate the whole sentence. Okay. If the adoption of ploughing increased a village population from 100 to no, with 10 people would have volunteered to starve so that the others could go back to the good old times. There was no going back. The trap snapped shut. The pursuit of an easier life resulted in much hardship, and not for the last time. It happens to us today. How many young college graduates have taken demanding jobs in high-powered firms, vowing that they will work hard to earn money that will enable them to retire and pursue their real interests when they are 35. But the time they reach that age, they have large mortgages, children to school, and houses in the suburbs that necessitate at least 2 cars per family. In a sense, that life is not worth living without really good wine and expensive holidays abroad. What are they supposed to do? Going back to digging up roots? No, they doubt their efforts and keep slaving away. One of history's few iron laws is that luxuries tend to become necessities and to spawn new obligations. Once people get used to a certain luxury, they take it for granted. Then they begin to count on it. Finally, they reach a point where they can't live without it. Let's take another family of example from our own time. Over the last few decades, we have invented countless time-saving devices that are supposed to make life more relaxed. Washing machines, vacuum cleaners, dishwashers, telephones, mobile phones, computers, email. Previously, it took a lot of work to write a letter, address and stamp an envelope, and take it to the mailbox. It took days or weeks, maybe even months to get a reply. Nowadays, I can dash off an email, send it halfway around the globe, and if my address is online, receive a reply a minute later. I've saved all that trouble and time, but do I live a more relaxed life? Oh no. Sadly not. Back in the snail mail era, people usually only wrote letters when they had something important to relate. Rather than writing the first thing that came into their heads, They considered carefully what they wanted to say and how to phrase it. They expected to receive a similarly considered answer. Most people wrote and received no more than a handful of letters a month, and seldom felt compelled to reply immediately. I received dozens of emails each day, and from people who expect a prompt reply. We thought we were saving time. Instead, we wrapped up the treadmill reply to 10 times its former speed and made our days more anxious and agitated. Worry or angry. Wrap up something or someone to become more active. Wrap up something. It means to become more active or to make someone or something become more active. Okay. Here and there, a lofted holder refused to open an email account. Just as thousands of years ago, some human bands refused to take up farming and so escaped the luxury trap. But the agricultural revolution didn't need every band in a given region to join up. It only took one. Once one band settled down and started tilling, whether in the Middle East or Central America, agriculture was irresistible. Since farming created the condition for swift demographic growth, farmers could usually overcome foragers by sheer weight of number. Sheer weight of number. I don't know. Sheer. Used to emphasize how very great, important, or powerful quality of feeling is. Nothing is well. Emphasize how very great, important, or powerful a quality or feeling is. Nothing except. The foragers could either run away, abandoning their hunting grounds to field and pasture, or take up the plowshare themselves. Either way, their old life was doomed. Pasture. Departure. Pasture. Grass. Or an area of land covered in this. The story of the luxury trap carries with it an important lesson. Humanity's search for an easier life released immense forces of change that transformed the world in ways nobody envisioned or wanted. Nobody plotted the agricultural revolution or sought human dependence on cereal cultivation. A series of trivial decisions aimed mostly at filling a few stomachs and gaining a little security had the cumulative effect on forcing ants and foragers to spend their days carrying water buckets under a scorching sun. Scorching sun is me. It's very sunny. Scorching. Very hot. Is it any other meaning? Very hot. Oh no. Okay. Divine intervention. Divided. I know, but divine. I don't know. Divine intervention. Sự can thiệp của thần thánh. Oh my god. The above scenario explains the agricultural revolution as a miscalculation. It's very plausible. History is full of far more idiotic miscalculation. But there's another possibility. Maybe it wasn't the search for an easier life that brought about the transformation. Maybe sapiens had other aspirations and were consciously willing to make their lives harder in order to achieve them. Scientists usually seek to attribute historical developments to cold economic and demographic factors. It sits better with their rational and mathematical methods. In the case of modern history, scholars cannot avoid taking into account non-material factors such as ideologies and culture. The written evidence forces their hand. We have enough documents, letters, and memoirs to prove that World War II was not caused by food shortage or demographic pressures, but we have no documents from the Natufian culture. So when dealing with ancient periods of the materialist school reign supremacy, it's difficult to prove that pre-literate people were motivated by faith rather than economic necessity. Yet, in some rare cases, we are lucky enough to find telltale clues. In 1995, archaeologists began to excavate a site in southeast Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. In the oldest stratum, they discovered no sign of a settlement, houses, or daily activities. They did, however, find monumental pillar structure decorated with spectacular engravings. Each stone pillar weighed up to 7 tons and reached a height of 5 meters. In a nearby quarry, they found a half-chisel pillars weighing 50 tons. Altogether, they uncovered more than 10 monument structures, the largest of them nearly 30 meters across. Göbekli Tepe. Okay, I can see it in the Google to see what it is. Complex sites. So the pillars here was 7 tons and reached a height of 5 meters. Okay. Archaeologists are familiar with such monumental structure from sites around the world. The best known example is Stonehenge in Britain. Stonehenge. Stonehenge. They studied Göbekli Tepe. They discovered an amazing fact. Stonehenge dates to 2500 BC and was built by a developed agricultural society. The structures at Göbekli Tepe are dated about 8500 BC, and all available evidence indicates that they were built by hunter-gatherers. The archaeological community initially found it difficult to credit these findings, but one test and after another confirmed both the early date of the structures and the pre-agricultural society of their builders. The capabilities of an ancient foragers and the complexity of their culture seem to be far more impressive than was previously suspected. Opposite, the remains of a monument structure from Göbekli Tepe rise one of the decorated stone pillars about 5 meters high. Why would a foraging society build such structures? They had no obvious utilitarian purpose. They were neither mammoth slaughter houses nor places to shelter from rain or hide from lions. That leaves us with the theory that they were built for some mysterious cultural purpose that archaeologists have hard time deciphering. Whatever it was, the forager thought it worth a huge amount of effort and time. The only way to build Göbekli Tepe was not 4,000 of foragers belonging to different bands and tribes to cooperate over an extended period of time. Only a sophisticated religious of ideological system could sustain such efforts. Göbekli Tepe held another sensational secret for many years. Geneticists have been tracing the origins of domesticated wheat. Recent discoveries indicate that at least one domesticated variant in corn wheat originated in the Kadak Hills about 30 kilometers from Göbekli Tepe. So they found the wheat that near the Göbekli Tepe, and we kind of, oh my God, God gave us the seeds, and we build it and eat it. This can hardly be a coincidence. It's likely that the cultural center of Göbekli Tepe was somehow connected to the initial domestication of wheat by humankind and of humankind by wheat. In order to feed the people who built and used the monument structures, particularly large quantities of food were required. It may well be that foragers switched from gathering wild wheat, no intense wheat cultivation, not to increase their normal food supply, but rather to support the building and running of a temple. In the conventional picture, pioneers first built a village, and when it prospered, they set up a temple in the middle. But Göbekli Tepe suggests that a temple may have been built first, and that a village later grew up around it. Victims of the revolution, the Faustian bargain between humans and grains were not the only deal our species made. Another deal was struck concerning the fate of an animal such as sheep, goats, pigs, and chickens. Nomadic bands that stocked with sheep got gradually onto the constitutions of the herds on which they preyed. This process probably began with selective hunting. Humans learned that it was to their advantage to hunt only adult rams and old of sick sheep. They spared fertile females and young lambs in order to safeguard the long-term vitality of the local herd. The second step might have been to actively defend the herd against predators, driving away lions, wolves, and rival human bands. The band might next have corralled the herd into a narrow gorge in order to better control and defend it. Finally, people began to make a more careful selection among the sheep in order to tailor them to human needs. The most aggressive rams, though that showed the greatest resistance to human control, were slaughtered first. So were skinniest and most inquisitive females. Shepherds are not fond of sheep whose curiosity takes them far from the herd. With each passing generation, the sheep became fatter, more submissive, and less curious. Voila. Voila. No, it's a French. Voila. Ở đâu? Voila. It's there. Over there. Okay. Mary had a little lamb, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. Alternatively, hunters may have caught and adopted a lamb, fattening it during the months of plenty and slaughtering it in the leaner season. At some stage, they began keeping a greater number of suck lambs. Some of these reached puberty and began to procreate. Puberty. The states in people, like when they develop from a child to adult, because of change in their body that make them able to have children. Tuổi dậy thì. The most aggressive and unruly lambs were first to the slaughter. The most submissive, most appealing lambs were allowed to live longer and procreate. The result was a herd of domesticated and submissive sheep, sub-domesticated animals, sheep, chicken, donkeys, and other supplied food, meat, milk, eggs, raw materials, skin, wool, and muscle power, transportation, ploughing, grinding, and other tasks hitherto performed by human sinew. Strong piece of tissue in the body connecting a muscle to a bone. Strong. Gần. Were increasingly carried out by animals. In most farming society, people focus on plant cultivation. Raising animals was a secondary activity, but a new kind of society also appeared in some places, based primarily on the exploitation of animals. Tribes pastoralists. No. Why I do not paste it? As humans spread around the world, so did their domesticated animal. 10,000 years ago, not more than few million sheep, cattle, goats, boars, and chickens lived in restricted Afro-Asian niches. Today, the world contains about a billion sheep, a billion pigs, more than a billion cattle, and more than 25 billion chickens. And they are all over the globe. The domesticated chicken is the most widespread forever. Following Homo sapiens, domesticated cattle, pigs, and sheep are the second, third, and fourth most widespread large mammals in the world. From a narrow evolutionary perspective, which measures success by the number of DNA copies, the agricultural revolution was a wonderful boon for chicken, cattle, pig, and sheep. Unfortunately, the evolutionary perspective is an incomplete measure of success. It judges everything by the criteria of survival and reproduction, with no regard for individual suffering and happiness. Domesticated chickens and cattle may well be an evolutionary success story, but they are also among the most miserable creatures that ever lived. The domestication of animals was founded on a series of brutal practices that only became crueler with the passing of the centuries. The natural lifespan of wild chicken is about 7 to 12 years, and of cattle about 20 to 25 years in the wild. Most chicken and cattle died long before that, but they still had a fair chance of living for a respectable number of years. In contrast, the vast majority of domesticated chicken and cattle are slaughtered at the age of between a few weeks and few months, because this has always been the optimal slaughtering age from an economic perspective. But keep feeding a cow for 3 years as if it had already reached its maximum weight after the 3 months. Oh my god. Egg-laying hens, dairy cows and draught animals are sometimes allowed to live for many years, but the price is subjugation to a way of life completely alien to the urge and desires. It's reasonable for assume, for example, that bulls prefer to spend their days wandering over open prairies in the company of other bulls and cows rather than pulling carts and splashes under the yoke of a whip-wielding ape. In order to turn bulls, horses, donkeys, and camels into obedient draught animals, their natural instincts and social ties had to be broken, their aggression and sexuality contained, and their freedom of movement curtailed. Farmers developed techniques such as locking animals inside pen cage, bridling them in harnesses and leashes, training them with whip and cattle prods, and mutilating them. The process of taming almost always involved the castration of males. This restrained male aggression and enabled humans selectively to control the herd's procreation. A painting from Egyptian grave c. 1200 BC. A pair of oxen ploughing a field. In the wild, cattle roam as they please in herd, with a complex social culture. The castrated and domesticated ox wasted away in his life under the lash and in a narrow pen, laboring alone or in pairs in a way that suited neither its body nor its social and emotional needs. When an ox could no longer pull the plow, it was slaughtered. Note the haunch position of the Egyptian farmer who, much like the ox, spent his life in hard labor oppressive to his body, his mind, and his social relationships. Oh. Khi nào mình hiểu sai không? Con mò. Oh my god. Không, lưng như con bò à. In many New Guinean societies, the wealth of a person has traditionally been determined by the number of pigs he or she owns. To ensure that the pigs can't run away, farmers in the northern New Guinea slice off a chunk of each pig's nose. This causes severe pain whenever the pig tries to sniff, since the pigs cannot find food or even find their way around without sniffing. This mutilation makes them completely dependent on their human owners. In another area of New Guinea, it has been customary to gouge out pigs' eyes so that they cannot even see where they are going. The dairy industry has its own ways of forcing animals to do it, while cows, goats, and sheep produce milk only after giving birth to calves, kids, and lambs, and only as long as the youngsters are suckling. To continue a supply of animal milk, a farmer needs to have calves, kids, or lambs for sucklings, but must prevent them from monopolizing the milk. One common method throughout history was to simply slaughter the calves and kids shortly after birth, milk the mother for all she was worth, and then get her pregnant again. This is still a very widespread technique in many modern dairy farms. A milk cow usually lives for about 5 years before being slaughtered. During these 5 years, she almost constantly pregnant and is fertilized within 60 to 130 days after giving birth in order to preserve maximum milk production. Her calves are separated from her shortly after birth. The females are bred to become the next generation of dairy cows, whereas the males are handed over to the care of the meat industry. Another method is to keep the calves and kids near their mothers, but prevent them by various stratagems from suckling too much milk. The simplest way to do that is to allow the kids of calf to start suckling, but the drive it away once the milk starts flowing. This method usually encounters resistance from both kid and mother. Some separate tribes used to kill the offspring, eat its flesh, and then stuff the skin. The stuffed offspring was then presented to the mother so that its presence would encourage her milk production. The newer tribe in the Sudan went so far as to smell stuffed animal with their mother urine to give the counterfeit calves a familiar live scent. Another newer technique was to tie a ring of thorns around a calf's mouth so that it pricks the mother and causes her to resist suckling. Tuareg camel breeders in the Sahara used to puncture or cut out parts of the nose and upper lip of young camel in order to make suckling painful. thereby discouraging them from consuming too much milk. Ew. Not all agricultural societies were this cruel to their farm animals. The lives of some domesticated animal could be quite good. Sheep raised for wool, pet dogs and cats, while horses and race horses often enjoy comfortable conditions. The Roman Emperor Caligula allegedly planned to appoint his favorite horse, Incitatus, to the consulship. Shepherds and farmers throughout history show affection for their animals and have taken great care of them, just as many slaveholders felt affection and concern for their slaves. It was no accident that kings and prophets styled themselves as shepherds and likened the way they and the gods care for their people to have shepherds care of his flock. A modern calf in an industrial meat farm, immediately after birth, the calf is separated from its mother and locked inside a tiny cage not much bigger than the calf's own body. There, the calf spends its entire life, amount of 4 months on average. It never leaves cage, nor is it allowed to play with other calves or even work. Also, that its muscle will not grow strong. Soft muscle means a soft and juicy stick. The first time the calf has a chance to walk, stretch its muscle, and tough other calves is only its way to slaughter's house. In evolutionary terms, cattle represent one of the most successful animal species ever to exist. At the same time, they are some of the most miserable animals on the planet. Oh my god. Những con vật đáng thương nhất thế giới sao? Buồn đi. Yet from the viewpoint of the herd rather than that of the shepherd, it's hard to avoid the impression that for the vast majority of domesticated animals, the agricultural revolution was a terrible catastrophe. Their evolutionary success is meaningless. A rare white rhinoceros on the brink of extinction is probably more satisfied than a calf who spent its short life inside a tiny box, fattened to produce juicy stick. The contented rhinoceros is no less content for being among the last of its kind. The numerical success of the calf species is little consolation for the suffering the individual endures. This discrepancy between evolutionary success and individual suffering is perhaps the most important lesson we can draw from the agricultural revolution. When we study the narrative of plants such as wheat and maize, maybe the purely evolutionary perspective makes sense. Here is a case of animals such as cattle, sheep, and sapiens. Each with a complex world of sensations and emotions, we have to consider how evolutionary success translates into individual experience. In the following chapters, we will see time again how a dramatic increase in the collective power and ostensible success of our species went hand in hand with much individual suffering. Oh no. Cần phải uống nước. Hydrate time. Partitions. ủng hộ. Strongly supporting a principle or political party, often without considering or judging the matter very carefully. Petition. A state of punishment that goes on forever, believed in some religions to be suffered by evil people after that. Believe. Okay. 6 building pyramids. Go. 7, 8. Okay, so we have 40 page left. The agricultural revolution is one of the most controversial events in history. Some partisans proclaim that set humankind on the road to prosperity and progress. Others insist that it led to perdition. This was a turning point, they say, where Sapiens cut off its intimate symbiosis with nature and sprinted towards great annihilation. Whichever direction the road led, there was no going back. Farming enabled population to increase so radically and rapidly that no complex agricultural society could ever again sustain itself if it returned to hunting and gathering. Around 10,000 BC, before the transition to agriculture, Earth was home to about 5 to 8 million nomadic foragers. By the 1st century AD, only 1 to 2 million foragers remained, mainly in Australia, America, and Africa, but their number were dwarfed by the world's 250 million farmers. The vast majority of farmers lived in permanent settlements. Only a few were nomadic Sophia herds. How to spell this word? Shepherd. Oh no. Shepherds. Settling down caused most peoples tough to shrink dramatically. Ancient hunter-gatherers usually lived in territories covering many dozen and even hundreds of square kilometers. home was the entire territory with its hills, streams, woods, and open sky. Peasants, on the other hand, spent most of their days working a small field or orchard, and their domestic life centered on a cramped structure of wood, stone, or mud, measuring no more than a few dozen meters. The house, the typical peasants developed a very strong attachment to this structure. This was a far-reaching revolution, whose impact was psychological as much as architecture. Hanford's attachment to my house and separation from the neighbors became psychological hallmark of a much more self-centered creature. The new agricultural territories were not only far smaller than those of ancient foragers, but also far more artificial. Aside from the use of fire, hunter-gatherer made a few deliberate changes to the land in which they roamed. Farmers, on the other hand, lived in artificial human islands that they laboriously carved out of the surrounding wilds. They cut down forests, dug canals, cleared fields, built houses, plowed furrows, and planted fruit trees in tidy rows. The resulting artificial habitat was meant only for humans and their plants and animals, and was often fenced up by walls and hedges. Families did all they could to keep out wayward weeds and wild animals. If such interlopers made their way in, they were driven out. If they persisted, their human antagonists sought ways to exterminate them. Particularly strong defenses were erected around the home. From the dawn of agriculture until this very day, billions of humans armed with branches, swatters, saws, and poison spray have waged relentless war against the virulent ant, furtive roaches, adventurous spiders, and misguided beetles that constantly infiltrate the human domicile. For most of history, these man-made enclaves remain very small, surrounded by expanses of untamed nature. The Earth's surface measures about 510 million square kilometers, of which 155 million islands is land, of which 155 million is land. As late as AD 1400, the vast majority of farmers, along with their plants and animals, clustered together in an area of just 11 million square kilometers, 2% of the planet's surface. Everywhere else were too cold, too hot, too dry, too wet, or unsuited for cultivation. This minuscule 2% of the Earth's surface constitutes the state on which history unfolds. People found it difficult to leave their artificial islands. They could not abandon their houses, fields, and grannies without grave risk of loss. Furthermore, as time went on, they accumulated more and more things, objects not easily transportable, that tied them down. Ancient farmers might seem to us dirt poor, but a typical family possessed more artifacts than an entire forager tribe. The coming of the future. While agricultural space shrank, agricultural time expanded. Foragers usually didn't waste much time thinking about next week or next month. Farmers sailed in their imagination years and decades into the future. Foragers discounted the future because they lived from hand to mouth and could only preserve food or accumulated possessions with difficulty. Of course, they clearly engaged in some advanced planning. The creators of the cave paintings of Chauvet, Lascaux, and Altamira almost certainly intended them to last of for a generation. Social alliance and politician rivalries were long-term affairs. It often took years to repay a favor or to avenge a wrong. Nevertheless, in the subsistence economy of hunting and gathering, there was an obvious limit to such long-term planning. Paradoxically, paradoxically, it saved foragers a lot of anxieties. There was no sense in worrying about things that they could not influence. The agricultural revolution made the future far more important than it had ever been before. Farmers must always keep the future in mind and must work in its service. The agricultural economy was based on a seasonal cycle of production comprising long months of cultivation, followed by short peak periods of harvest. On the night following the end of a plentiful harvest, the peasants might celebrate for all they were worth, but within a week or so they were again up and down. So they were again up at dawn for a long day in the field. Although there was enough food for today, next week, and even next month, they had to worry about next year and the next year after that. Concern about the future was rooted not only in seasonal cycle production but also in the fundamental uncertainty of agriculture. Since most villages lived by cultivating a very limited variety of domesticated plants and animals, they were at the mercy of droughts, floods, droughts, floods, and pestilence. No, I don't know why I only smoothly add about a sentence. Pestilence. Any very serious infectious disease that spread quickly and kill large number of people. Disease. Pestilence. Peasants were obliged to produce more than they consumed so that they could build up reserves. Without grain in the silo, jars or olive oil in the cellar, cheese in the pantry, and sausage hanging from the rafters, they would starve in bad years, and bad years were bound to come sooner or later. A peasant living on the assumption that bad years would not come didn't live long. Consequently, from the very advent of agriculture, worries about the future became major players in the theater of the human mind. Were farmers dependent on rains to water their fields, the onset of the rainy season meant that each morning the farmer gazed towards the horizon, sniffing the wind and straining their eyes. Without a cloud, would the rains come on time? Would there be enough? Would violent storms wash the seeds from the fields and bear down seedlings? Meanwhile, the valley of the Euphrates, Indus, and Yellow River, other peasants monitored with no less trepidation the height of the water that needed the rivers to rise in order to spread the fertile topsoil washed down from the highlands and to enable the vast irrigation system to fill with water. But floods that surged too high or came at the wrong time could destroy their fields as much as a drought. Peasants were worried about the future not just because they had more cause for worry, but also because they could do something about it. They could clear another field, dig another irrigation canal, sow sow more crops. The ancient peasant was a fanatic and hardworking as a harvester, and in the summer, sweating to plant olive trees whose oil would be pressed by his children and grandchildren, putting off until the winter or the following year the eating of the food he craved today. The threat of farming had far-reaching consequences. It was the foundation of large-scale political and social system. Sadly, the Vietnamese peasants almost never achieved the future economic security they so craved through their hard work in the present. Everywhere, rulers and elites sprang up, living off the peasants' surplus food and leaving them with only a bare subsistence. These fortified food surplus fueled politics, wars, art and philosophy. They built palaces, forts, monuments, and temples. Until the late modern era, more than 90% of humans were peasants who rose each morning to till the land by the sweat of their brows. The extra they produced fed the tiny minority of elites, kings, government officials, soldiers, priests, artists, and thinkers who filled the history books. History is something that very few people have been doing while everyone else were ploughing fields and carrying water buckets. Okay. An imagined order. The food surplus produced by peasants, coupled with new transportation technology, eventually enable more and more people to cram together, first into large villages, then into towns, and finally into cities, all of them joined together by new kingdoms and commercial networks. Yet, in order to take advantage of these new opportunities, food surplus and improved transportation were not enough. The mere fact that one can feed 1,000 people in the same town or 1,000,000 people in the same kingdom does not guarantee that they can agree how to divide the land and water, how to settle disputes and conflicts, and how to act in times of drought or war. And if no agreement can be reached, strife spreads, even if the storehouse and bulking. It was not food shortage that caused most of history, wars, and revolution. The French Revolution was spearheaded by affluent lawyers, not by famished peasants. The Roman Republic reached by the height of its power in the 1st century BC, when the treasure fleets formed throughout the Mediterranean. Mediterranean. Okay. Mediterranean enriched the Romans beyond their ancestors' widest dreams. Yet it was at that moment of maximum affluence that the Roman political order collapsed into a series of deadly civil wars. Yugoslavia in 1991 had more than enough resources to feed all its inhabitants, and still disintegrated into a terrible bloodbath. The problem that the root of such calamities is that humans evolved for millions of years in small bands of a few dozen individuals. The handful of millennia separating the agricultural revolution from the appearance of the cities, kingdoms, and empires were not enough time to allow an instinct for mass cooperation to evolve. Despite the lack of such biological instincts during the foraging era, hundreds of strangers were able to cooperate thanks to their shared myths. However, this cooperation was loose and limited. Every Sapiens band continued to run its life independently and to provide for most of its own needs. An archaic sociologist living 20,000 years ago who had no knowledge of events following the agricultural revolution might well have concluded that mythologies had a fairly limited scope. Stories about ancestral spirits and tribal totems were strong enough to enable 500 people to trade seashells, celebrate the Oz festival, and join forces to wipe out a Neanderthal band, but no more than that. Mythology, the ancient sociologists would have thought, could not possibly enable millions of strangers to cooperate on a daily basis. But that turned out to be wrong. Myths, it transpired, are stronger than anyone could have imagined. One, the agricultural revolution opened opportunities for the creation of crowded cities and mighty empires. People invented stories about great gods, motherlands, and joined stock companies to provide the needed social links. Oh my god, joined stock companies on the very early, while human evolution was crawling at its usual snail's pace. The human imagination was building astounding networks of mass cooperation unlike any other ever seen on Earth. Around 8500 BC, the largest settlements in the world were villages such as Jericho, which contained a few hundred individuals. By 7000 BC, the town of Katahojuk in Anatolia numbered between 5,000 and 10,000 individuals. It may well have been the world's biggest settlement at the time. During the 5th and 4th millennia BC, cities with tens of thousands of inhabitants sprouted in the Fertile Crescent, and each of these held sway over many nearby villages. In 3800 BC, the entire lower Nile Valley was united into the first Egyptian kingdom. Its pharaohs ruled thousands of square kilometers and hundreds of thousands of people. Around 2250 BC, Sargon the Great forges the first empire, the Akkadian. It boasted over 1 million subjects and a standing army of 5,400 soldiers. Between 1000 BC and 500 BC, the first mega empires appeared in the Middle East: the late Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, and the Persian Empire. There are too much empire. Okay, on this land near. Okay. In the 221 BC, the Qin dynasty united China. Nhà Tần Thủy Hoàng ha. Kiên Sĩ Hoàng, đúng rồi, nhà Tần đấy. And shortly afterwards, Rome united Mediterranean. And shortly afterwards, Rome united the Mediterranean basin. Taxes levied on 40 million Queen subjects, paid for a standing army of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and a complex bureaucracy that employed more than 800,000 officials. Quan lại. Không biết đọc kiểu gì. The Roman Empire at its zenith collected taxes from up to 800 million subjects. Bureaucracy. Quan lại. Bộ máy quan lại. Chế độ. Quan lại. Don't correct me. The Roman Empire at its genetic success. This revenue financed a standing army of 250,000 to 500,000 soldiers, a road network still in use 1,500 years later, and theaters and amphitheaters that host spectacles to this day. A stone stela inscribed with the Code of Hammurabi c. 76 BC. Impressive, no doubt, but we mustn't harbor rosy illusions about mass corporation networks operating in pharaonic Egypt or the Roman Empire. Cooperation sounds very altruistic, but it's not always voluntary and seldom egalitarian. Most human cooperation networks have been geared geared towards oppression and exploitation. The peasants paid the peasants nông dân, người nhà quê. Peasant. The peasant, người nông dân. The peasant is a person who owns or rents a small piece of land and grow crops, keep animal, etc. on it, especially one who has a low income, very little education, peasants, and a low social position. This is usually used of someone who lived in the past or of someone in a poor country like me. Peasants. The peasant paid for the burgeoning cooperation networks with their precious food surplus, despairing when the tax collector wiped out an entire year of hard labor with a single stroke of his imperial pen. The famed Roman amphitheater were often built by slaves so that wealthy an idle Roman could watch other slaves engage in vicious gladiatorial combat. Violent fighting in which one person or group can win. Sống mất chết à? Đấu sĩ gladiatoria vicious gladiatorial combat. Even prisons and concentration camps are cooperation networks and can function only because thousands of strangers somehow manage to coordinate their actions. In Congress, July 1776, the Declaration of Independence of the United States, signed for July 1776. Khai sinh. Độc lập là gọi là gì? Dình mượt gọi là gì? Tuyên ngôn độc lập. All these cooperation networks, from the cities of ancient Mesopotamia to the Queen in the Roman empires, were imagined orders. The social norms that sustained them were based neither on ingrained instincts nor on personal acquaintance, but rather on belief in shared myths. How can myths sustain entire empires? We have already discussed one such example, to God. Now let's examine two of the best known myths of history. The Code of Hammurabi c. 1776 BC, which served as a cooperation manual for hundreds of thousands of ancient Babylonians, and the American Declaration of Independence of 1776 AD, which today still serves as a cooperation manual for hundreds of millions of modern Americans. In 1776 BC, Babylon was the world's biggest city. The Babylonian Empire was probably the world's largest, with more than 1 million subjects. It ruled most of Mesopotamia, including the bulk of modern Iraq and part of present-day Syria and Iran. The Babylonian king's most famous day was Hammurabi. His fame is due primarily to the text that bear his name, the Code of Hammurabi. This was a collection of laws and judicial decisions whose aim was to present Hammurabi as a role model of a just king, serve as a basis for a more uniform legal system across the Babylonian Empire, and teach future generations what justice is and how a just king acts. Future generations took notice. The intellectual and bureaucratic elite of ancient Mesopotamia canonized the text, and apprenticed scribes continued to copy it long after Hammurabi died and his empire lay in ruins. Hammurabi's code is therefore a good source for understanding the ancient Mesopotamian ideal of social order. The text began by saying that the gods Anu and Enlil and Marduk, the leading deities of Mesopotamian pantheon, appointed to Hammurabi to make justice prevail in the land, to abolish the weak and the evil, to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. It then lists about 300 judgments given in the set formula. If such and such a thing happens, such is the judgment. For example, judgment 896 9 and 209 to 14. Read 896. If a superior man should blind the eye of another superior man, they shall blind his eye. If he should break the bone of another superior man, they shall break his bone. If he should blind the eye of a commoner or break the bone of a commoner, he shall wait and deliver 60 shekels of silver. If he should blind the eye of a slave of a superior man, or break the bone of a slave of a superior man, he shall wait and deliver 1/2 of the slave's value in silver. If a superior man strikes a woman of superior class and thereby cause her to miscarry her fetus, he shall wait and deliver 10 shekels of silver to her fetus. If that woman should die, they shall kill his daughter. If he should cause a woman of commoner class to miscarry her fetus by beating, he shall wait and deliver 5 kettle of silver. If that woman should die, he shall wait and deliver 30 shekels of silver. If he strikes a slave woman of a superior man and thereby causes her to miscarry her fetus, he shall wait and deliver 2 shekels of silver. If that slave woman should die, he shall wait and deliver 20 shekels of silver. Okay. After listing his judgments, Hammurabi again declares that these are just decisions which Hammurabi, Honorable King, has established and thereby has directed the land along the course of truth and the correct way of life. I am Hammurabi, noble king. I have not been careless or negligent towards humankind, granted to make care by the god Enlil and will whose shepherding the god Marduk chained me. Hammurabi's code asserts that Babylonian social order is rooted in universal and eternal principle of justice dictated by the god. The principle of hierarchy is of paramount importance. According to the code, people are divided into 2 genders and 3 classes: superior people, commoners, and slaves. Members of each gender and class have different value. The life of a female commoner is worthy 30 silver shekels, and that of a slave woman 20 silver shekels, whereas the eye of a male commoner is worth 60 silver shekels. The code also establishes a strict hierarchy within a family, according to which children are not independent persons, but rather the property of their parents. Hence, if one superior man kills the daughter of another superior man, the killer's daughter is executed in punishment. To us, it may seem strange that the killer remains unharmed, whereas his innocent daughter is killed, but to Hammurabi and the Babylonians it seemed perfectly just. Hammurabi's code was based on the premise that if the king's subjects all accepted in their position in the hierarchy and acted accordingly, the empire's million inhabitants would be able to cooperate effectively. Their society could then produce enough food for its members, distribute it efficiently, protect itself against its enemies, and expand its territories so as to acquire more wealth and better security. About 3,500 years after Hammurabi's death, the inhabitants of 13 British colonies in North America felt that the King of England was treating them unjustly. Their representatives gathered in the city of Philadelphia, and on 4 July 1776, the colonies declared that their inhabitants were no longer subjects to the British Crown. Their Declaration of Independence proclaimed universal and eternal principle of justice, which, like those of Hammurabi, was inspired by a divine power. However, the most important principle dictated by the American god was somewhat different from the principle dictated by the gods of Babylon. The American Declaration of Independence asserts that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equally, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like Hammurabi's code, the American founding document promised that if humans act accordingly to its sex principle, millions of them would be able to cooperate effectively, living safely and peacefully in a just and prosperous society. Like the Code of Hammurabi, the American Declaration of Independence was not just a document of its time and place, it was accepted by future generations as well. For more than 200 years, American school children have been copying and learning it by heart. The two texts present us with an obvious dilemma. Both the Code of Hammurabi and the American Declaration of Independence claim to outline universal and eternal principle of justice, but accordingly to Americans, all people are equal, whereas accordingly to Babylonian, people are decided unequal. The American would, of course, say that they are right, and Hammurabi is wrong. Hammurabi naturally would retort that he is right, and that the Americans are wrong. In fact, they are both wrong. Hammurabi and the American founding fathers alike imagined a reality governed by universal and immutable principle of justice, such as equality or hierarchy. Yet the only place where such universal principle exists in the fertile imagination of Sapiens, and in the myths they invent and tell one another. These principles have no objective validity. It is easy for us to accept that the division of people into superiors and commoners is a figment of the imagination, yet the idea that all humans are equal is all a myth. In what sense do all humans equal one another? If there any objective reality outside the human imagination in which we are truly equal, our human equal to one another biological? Let's try to translate the most famous line of American Declaration of Independence into biological terms. We hold the truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with a certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Mỗi người sinh ra đều có quyền bình đẳng. Tạo hóa đã cho chúng ta cái quyền đó. Tất cả mọi người sinh ra đều bình đẳng, hoặc đừng tạo hóa ban cho những người bất hạnh xâm phạm cho nó quyền được sống, quyền được tự do và mới có hạnh phúc. According to the science of biology, people were not created. They have evolved, and they certainly did not evolve to be equal. The idea of equality is inextricably intertwined with the idea of creation. The American got the idea of equality from Christianity, which argues that every person has a divinely created soul, and that all souls are equal before God. However, if we do not believe in the Christian myths about God, creation, and souls, what does it mean that all people are equal? Evolution is based on difference, not on equality. Every person carries a somewhat different genetic code, and it exposed from birth to different environmental influences. This leads to the development of different qualities that carry with them different chances of survival. Created equal should therefore be translated into evolve differently. Just like people were never created, neither, according to the science, biology is their creator who endows them with anything. There's only a blind evolutionary process devoid of any purpose, leading to the birth of individuals endowed by their creator should be translated simply into born. Equally, there are no such thing as rights in biology. There are only organs, ability, and characteristics. Birds fly not because they have a right to fly, but because they have wings. And it's not true that these organs, abilities, and characteristics are unalienable. Many of them undergo constant mutation and may well be completely lost over time. The ostrich is a bird that lost its ability to fly, so unalienable rights to be translated into mutable characteristics. And what are the characteristics that involved in human life? Certainly, but liberty. There is no such thing in biology, just like equality, right, and limited liability companies. Liberty is something that people invented and that exists only in their imagination. From a biological viewpoint, it's meaningless to say that humans in democratic society are free, whereas humans in dictatorships are unfree. What about happiness? So far, biological research has failed to come up with a clear definition of happiness or a way to measure it objectively. Most biological studies acknowledge only the existence of pleasure, which is more easily defined and measured. So life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness should be translated into life and the pursuit of pleasure. So here's that line from American Declaration of Independence translated into biological terms. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men evolve differently, that they are born with certain mutable characteristics, and that among these are life and pursuit of pleasure. Advocate of equality and human rights may be outraged by this line of reasoning. Their response is likely to be, we know that people are not equal biologically, but if we believe that we are equal in essence, if we enable us to create a stable, prosperous society, I have no argument with that. This is exactly what I mean by imagine order. We believe in particular order not because it's objective to, but because believing in it enables us to cooperate effectively and forge a better society. Imagine orders are not evil conspiracies or usually mirage. Rather, they are the only way a large number of humans can cooperate effectively. Bear in mind thoughts that Hammurabi might have defended his principle of hierarchy using the same logic. I know that superiors, commoners, and slaves are not inherently different kinds of people, but if we believe that they are, it will enable us to create a stable and prosperous society. Okay. Ôi ngon quá. 135. Mình gặp từ 90 mấy. Nhập được cái chương 2 120. Oh my god. Bây giờ là 135. Mình chính trả chậm quá. Ok. True beliefs. True believer. Những người đáng tin cậy. Người có đức tin á. Ok. Thôi, được rồi. Này đến đây thôi. Mình sẽ phải nốt lại những cái từ mới rồi.